Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as James Mitchell mechanically went through his post-shift routine. 24 hours of back-to-back emergency calls had left him exhausted, but the cryptic message from Andrea's school principal had sent him rushing home instead of catching his usual recovery sleep at the station. Fourth time this month, he muttered, checking his phone again. No response to his texts or calls. Andrea had never missed a day of teaching in 12 years. Her perfect attendance record was practically legendary at Roosevelt High. James's firefighter uniform still carried the acrid smell of smoke from their last call, a warehouse fire that had nearly gone critical. He would have changed, but something about the principal's tone had set off a warning bell in his mind. 15 years on the job had taught him to trust those instincts. The house felt wrong. Andrea's car was in the driveway, but the usual sounds of NPR or her favorite classical music station were missing. Instead, a faint bass line pulsed from somewhere below. The basement door stood slightly open, warm air carrying up unfamiliar music. "Andrea?" James called out, his voice echoing in the empty kitchen. The basement lights were on, shadows moving across the sliver of light visible through the door gap. The music suddenly cut off. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and James felt his world tilt sideways as two figures emerged from the basement. Andrea, her dark hair disheveled and lipstick smeared, followed by Matthew Reynolds, his best friend of 20 years and fellow firefighter. Well, Andrea drawled, her normally warm voice dripping with contempt. "Look who's home early. Done playing hero for the day." James stared at Matthew's hand resting possessively on his wife's hip. The same hand they'd clasped in brotherhood countless times during rescues, the same friend who'd stood as his best man. "What's going on here?" James kept his voice steady, though his hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Andrea's laugh held no trace of the woman he'd married. "Oh, don't act so shocked, loser. Did you really think I was happy playing the devoted wife while you ran off to save everyone else?" She leaned back against Matthew, who smirked with undisguised satisfaction. 5 years, she continued, clearly savoring each word. "Matthew and I have been meeting right here in your precious basement. All those renovations he helped with. We turned it into our little love nest while you were pulling your heroic double shifts." Matthew finally spoke, his familiar voice now twisted with mockery. "Someone had to keep her satisfied, brother. You were always too busy with the job, weren't you? Missing dinners, holidays, anniversaries. A woman has needs." Andrea's hand drifted to her stomach in a gesture that made James's blood run cold. "We're going to have what you could never give me, a family." Her smile turned cruel. "Oh, and don't bother running to tell Claire about this. Your precious friend's wife already caught us months ago. She knows we deserve each other." James stood perfectly still, his fire captain training kicking in automatically. Assess, control, respond. His voice came out calm, almost detached. "How long has Claire known?" "Long enough," Matthew shrugged. "She's not as fragile as you think. Unlike you, she can handle the truth about what she married." "The truth?" James' laugh held no humor. "That's rich coming from you, Matt. Real rich." Andrea's expression flickered for just a moment before hardening again. "Don't try to play the victim here. You drove me to this with your constant absence. Your precious job always came first." Matthew took a threatening step forward. "Watch your mouth, brother. You might be a hero at work, but this isn't your firehouse." "No," James agreed quietly. "It's my house. My basement. My wife." His gaze locked onto Andrea, at least for now. Andrea's sneer wavered slightly at his tone. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "that you both seem awfully confident for people with so much to lose." Before either could respond, James' phone buzzed. The display showed a 911 dispatch alert. Domestic disturbance reported at 1542 Oak Street, Reynolds residence. James looked up slowly, meeting Matthew's suddenly uncertain gaze. "Trouble at home, brother?" Alone in the kitchen, James moved with mechanical precision, years of emergency response training taking over. His mind compartmentalized the betrayal, focusing instead on patterns and evidence. He pulled out his laptop, accessing the department scheduling system. The past year's shift records told the story. Every time James had been scheduled for a 24-hour rotation, Matthew had called in sick at least once during that period. The dates formed a damning pattern. Computers running slow today, Tom, their shift supervisor, had complained just last week. Matt's been reorganizing all the old scheduling files. Said he was helping streamline things. James opened his personal calendar, cross-referencing dates. The department fundraisers Andrea had organized, 6 in the past year alone. Matthew had volunteered to handle the treasury for each one, insisting his business degree made him perfect for the job. "You're lucky to have such a dedicated wife," Chief Harrison had said at the last firefighters' ball. Andrea's raised more money than any previous coordinator. The basement renovation flickered through his memory. Matthew had spent weeks down there, insisting on doing the electrical work himself. "Can't trust these modern contractors," he said. "Besides, what are brothers for?" James pulled up his home's electrical bills for the past year. The usage pattern showed suspicious spikes far beyond what 2 people should consume. The basement's separate circuit, Matthew's idea, didn't register on the main panel readings. His phone chimed with a text from Claire, dated just 3 days ago. "Dinner still on for Saturday? Can't believe our 15th anniversary party is next month. Andrew's been so helpful with the planning." Something cold settled in James's gut. If Claire had really caught them months ago, why was she still planning celebrations? Why keep up the pretense in private messages? The dispatch alert about the Reynolds residence kept flashing on his phone. James pulled up Matthew's personnel file using his captain's access. 3 domestic disturbance calls in the past year, all mysteriously missing from the official record. The responding officers' names had been redacted. "Computer issues," Matthew had explained during their last system upgrade. "Had to clean up some corrupted files. You know how it is with these old systems." The pattern crystallized with brutal clarity. Not just the affair, something bigger was happening. The fundraisers, the electrical work, the missing records. His phone buzzed again. Another 911 dispatch. "Female victim at Reynolds residence requesting medical attention. Possible domestic assault." James grabbed his keys, his mind already mapping out next steps. If his suspicions were right, the affair was just the surface of a much darker truth. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but James moved through it with practiced ease. He had transported enough victims here to know the quiet corners, the places where privacy still existed. He found Claire Reynolds in one of those corners, perched on an exam table. Her designer blouse, the one she'd worn proudly at last month's department dinner, was spattered with blood from her split lip. A bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, already turning purple. "James," her voice cracked as she looked up. "Got the dispatch call," he said quietly, pulling up a chair. "Want to tell me what happened?" Claire's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. "I found receipts," she whispered. "Strange deposits in our joint account. When I asked Matthew about them," she gestured to her face. "First time?" James kept his voice neutral, professional. "No." The words seemed to deflate her. "But he always said no one would believe me. That you'd never accept anything bad about your best friend." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He said the department would back him up, that he'd taken care of any incidents." James pulled out his phone, setting it to record. "Tell me everything, Claire. Start with when you actually found out about Andrea." Claire's head snapped up. "Andrea? What about?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh God. They told you I knew? That I was okay with it?" Fresh tears spilled over. "James, I just found out today. The receipts, they had her name on them. When I confronted him..." "That's when he hit you," James finished. She nodded. "He said I couldn't prove anything. That he'd make sure any report disappeared, just like the others." Her voice hardened. "But he was wrong about one thing. I did keep proof." Claire reached into her purse with shaking hands, withdrawing a USB drive. Bank statements, text messages, photos of the other times she swallowed hard. I was afraid no one would believe me without evidence. James pocketed the drive. You did good, Claire. Real good. He stood, decision made. I need to make some calls. You okay here for a minute? She managed a weak smile. The nurse said Detective Sarah Martinez is coming. She specializes in domestic cases. Sarah's good people, James nodded. She'll take care of you. In the hallway, James made 2 calls. The first to Internal Affairs, requesting an urgent review of all domestic incident reports involving Matthew Reynolds, with special attention to deleted or modified records. The second call went to the Roosevelt High School Board. This is Captain James Mitchell, he said calmly. I need to discuss some irregularities in the fundraising accounts managed by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds, specifically large discrepancies between reported donations and actual deposits. He ended the calls, staring at the phone for a long moment. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far uglier than a simple affair. The basement electrical work, the missing funds, the corrupted records. Claire's voice echoed in his mind. I did keep proof. James smiled grimly. It was time to see exactly what his wife and best friend had been hiding in his basement. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to fight fire was to let it burn hot enough for everyone to see the truth in its light. James sat in his dimly lit home office at 3:00 a.m., surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 computer monitors. The digital records from Claire's USB drive had opened a Pandora's box of deception. Bank statements revealed a joint account under Matthew and Andrea's names, with regular cash deposits that coincided perfectly with the fundraisers they had organized. Captain Mitchell. Sarah Chin's voice crackled through his phone. The department's forensic accountant had been working through the night at his request. Those fundraising records you sent. It's worse than we thought. Much worse. 20 minutes later, James stood in Sarah's office at the station, watching as she pulled up spreadsheet after damning spreadsheet on her dual monitors. See this pattern? She highlighted a series of transactions. Every charity drive, every department fundraiser for the past 3 years. The reported totals never matched the actual deposits. We're looking at nearly $200,000 in discrepancies, but that's just the surface. James leaned closer, his jaw tightening. Explain. The money moves through a series of shell accounts before landing here. Sarah pulled up another document. 5 different charitable foundations, all registered to vacant offices. Matthew set them up using his treasurer credentials. Each one received donations from the fundraisers before the money disappeared into offshore accounts. And no one caught this? James asked, his voice tight. Matthew was methodical, Sarah replied. He'd submit final reports weeks late, claiming he needed time to reconcile cash donations. By then, everyone was focused on the next event. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. But he got cocky, started taking bigger cuts, getting sloppy with the paperwork. James's phone buzzed with a text from Tom, the station's senior electrician. Cap, found something in the electrical plan. Power draw calculations for your basement are way off. This setup, it's designed for industrial-grade ventilation, temperature control, specialized lighting circuits. Classic indoor growing operation setup. Send me everything, James ordered, then turned back to Sarah. The basement renovation timeline? Sarah pulled up the permits filed 8 months ago. Electrical work signed off by... She paused, frowning. That's odd. The inspector's signature is smudged on all of them, but the authorization number matches 3 other inspections Matthew handled personally. Cross-reference those inspections with property records, James instructed. Sarah's eyes widened as the results populated her screen. All commercial properties, all recently sold to the same holding company that keeps appearing in the charity accounts. James' phone rang. Detective Martinez from Narcotics. Captain, got those surveillance photos you asked for. Last 3 months of activity around Roosevelt High. You need to see this. The photos showed Andrea's car parked behind the school gym during various events. Basketball games, parent-teacher conferences, fundraisers. In each image, different vehicles would appear, stay for exactly 7 minutes, then leave. Those license plates, Martinez continued. They match known associates of the Santiago illegal substance ring. Your wife's been using school events as cover for distribution. James felt cold rage building, but his voice remained steady. The basement wasn't just their love nest. They turned my home into a distribution hub. He dialed a number he kept for emergencies. Jack Mitchell here. Remember that warehouse fire where you lost your whole surveillance operation? Time to call in that favor. I need your team off the books. Sarah looked up from her computer. Want me to alert internal affairs? Not yet, James said, his smile holding no warmth. First, we document everything. Every transaction. Every meeting. Every fake inspection. Let them think they're still invisible. They use your reputation as cover, Sarah said softly. Your own home. James cut her off. They used everyone. The department. The school. Claire. All those kids at Fundraisers. His expression hardened. Now we use their overconfidence against them. The Roosevelt High Personnel Office buzzed with quiet tension as Linda Martinez, head of HR, closed her office door. She had worked at the school for 20 years, but her hands shook as she placed a thick file on her desk. This is difficult, Captain Mitchell, she said, pushing the file forward. Your wife's personnel records contain irregularities. When you requested the audit, we found things that didn't add up. James opened the file to find medical forms bearing his forged signature. According to these documents, his bout with smoke inhalation 2 years ago had left him permanently infertile, a convenient explanation for Andrea's suspicious pregnancy. She told everyone you refused fertility treatments, Linda explained, anger creeping into her voice. Said you were too focused on your career to consider alternatives. The staff even took up collections for her private medical consultations. Even the students held bake sales. How much did they raise? James asked, his voice cold. Over $115,000 in the past year alone. Linda pulled out more papers, but the doctor she claimed to see, Dr. Samuel Richardson, doesn't exist. The clinic address leads to an abandoned strip mall. James' phone buzzed with updates from Jack's surveillance team. Multiple transactions observed during school events. Known dealers entering through gym entrance. A. Mitchell handling exchanges personally. M. Reynolds conducting building inspections immediately after. Linda wasn't finished. There's more. These permission slips for after-school activities. All forged. Parents' signatures don't match our records. She's been using legitimate events as cover for something else. And the fundraisers? Same pattern. Events scheduled strategically, always with restricted access areas. Matthew would conduct fire inspections the same day, claiming certain sections were off limits for safety checks. James' phone rang. Claire's number. James, her voice trembled. I found Matthew's old papers, records from Colorado. She took a shaky breath. This isn't the first time. 3 years before we moved here, he had an affair with another firefighter's wife. They were caught stealing department funds. What happened? James asked. His chief gave him a choice, resign quietly or face charges. I believed him when he said it was a mistake. Claire's laugh held years of accumulated bitterness. I helped him start over here, convinced the chief to give him a second chance. God, I was such a fool. You weren't the fool, Claire, James said. You were just another part of their cover. He closed the file on the desk. I need everything you found. Then pack a bag and go somewhere safe. Don't tell Matthew. Already gone, she said. I'm at my sister's. Her voice steadied. I'm done protecting him. After seeing what they did to you, to everyone, no more. The wall of monitors in Jack's surveillance van painted a damning picture. Hidden cameras captured every angle of the sophisticated growing operation concealed behind the basement's false walls. Tom, reviewing the electrical schematics, shook his head in disgust. Brilliant setup, in a stick way, he muttered. Use the renovation to mask everything. Extra power draw hidden in normal usage patterns. Ventilation disguised as home improvement. even added a backup generator so power outages wouldn't kill the plants. James watched Andrea enter the basement on one screen. Her phone conversation was picked up clearly by the hidden microphones. "No, listen carefully," she snapped. "Schedules changed. Too many parents hanging around for that fundraiser next week. We need to move everything before the audit." She paused. "Fine. Tell them to meet at the usual spot behind the gym. Matthew's already doctored the inspection records." Another screen showed Matthew at Roosevelt High's loading dock, exchanging paperwork with a nervous-looking building supervisor. Money changed hands, disappearing into Matthew's jacket. "Third falsified inspection this week," Jack noted. "Buildings all match known distribution points." "He's creating a paper trail showing they're unsafe for regular inspections," James said. "Perfect cover for restricted access." James handed over a list of email addresses. "Send everything to these contacts. School board, fire department, internal affairs, DEA task force. Time it for maximum impact, simultaneous notifications." The evidence mounted as they watched. Surveillance photos caught Andrea passing packages during school events. Matthew conducting rushed inspections of known illegal substance houses. Bank records revealed money flowing through charities into offshore accounts. "One more thing," Tom called out, reviewing maintenance logs. "These equipment checks Matthew signed off on. All fake. He's been certifying safety gear that's never been inspected. Probably pocketing the maintenance budget too." James stared at the wall of evidence. Photos, documents, surveillance footage, financial records. Andrea and Matthew had woven a complex web of deception, using his reputation and position as cover for their operation. "Send the maintenance logs directly to Chief Harrison," he ordered. "Our brothers deserve to know who they've been trusting their lives to." The pieces formed a perfect trap. James studied the evidence before him, knowing that soon, very soon, all their carefully constructed lies would come crashing down. They'd played him for a fool, used his home, endangered his fellow firefighters, and corrupted a school system meant to protect children. Now they would learn the true cost of their betrayal. The time for gathering evidence was over. Soon would come the reckoning. Roosevelt High's auditorium was packed for the monthly board meeting. The room hummed with parents' chatter, teachers lounging in their usual cliques. Andrea sat prominently in the front row, surrounded by her sympathetic supporters. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she whispered to Susan Parker, another English teacher who had helped organize fundraisers for her supposed fertility treatments. Chief Harrison slipped quietly into the back row, followed by several senior firefighters who positioned themselves strategically around the room. Matthew lounged near the emergency exit, his uniform immaculate, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He winked at Andrea, their shared confidence still unshaken. Board President Richard Chin, a stern-faced former prosecutor, called the meeting to order at exactly 7:00 p.m. Before we address our regular agenda items, Captain James Mitchell has requested time to discuss concerns about our fundraising programs. Andrea's head snapped up, her practiced smile faltering as James approached the podium. He carried a simple leather briefcase, his movements measured and deliberate. Two men in dark suits entered through the side door. FBI agents, though nobody knew that yet. "Thank you, President Chin," James began, his voice filling the room without effort. Years of command presence were evident in every word. "I'm here to discuss the truth about what's really been happening with our school's charitable initiatives." The projector screen flickered to life behind him. This spreadsheet represents every fundraiser organized in the past 3 years. Green numbers show reported totals. Red numbers show actual deposits. Gasps rippled through the audience as six-figure discrepancies became apparent. $217,000, James continued, clicking through detailed financial records. That's how much disappeared into private accounts controlled by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds. "These accusations are outrageous." Andrea shot to her feet, playing to her audience. "I've dedicated my life to these kids while you played hero at the firehouse. Everyone here knows." "Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell." President Chin's voice cracked like a whip. "Captain Mitchell has the floor." and I believe the FBI agents would prefer you remain seated. James clicked to the next slide. Surveillance photos showing Andrea's clandestine meetings behind the gym. Students walked past in the background, unwitting extras in her illegal substance operation. While parents believed they were supporting education, their children were being exposed to illegal substance trafficking. The room erupted. Susan Parker recoiled from Andrea as if burned. Matthew pushed off the wall, starting forward, but Chief Harrison's quiet command froze him mid-step. "Stay put, Reynolds. That's an order." "The evidence has been independently verified," James continued over the chaos. "Forensic accountants traced every dollar, every transaction, documented every meeting, recorded every inspection." He turned to address Andrea directly. "Would you like to explain to these parents how their donations funded your affair and illegal substance operation? Or should I detail how you use school events as distribution points?" Andrea's mask cracked. "You're lying." "Matthew, do something." "About what exactly?" James' voice could have frozen fire. "The illegal substance operation you built in my basement? The falsified inspection reports covering your distribution network? Or maybe your creative storytelling about my fertility?" The school nurse stood up, fury twisting her normally kind face. "We raised over $20,000 for your fertility treatments. You said your husband refused to help?" She glared at Andrea. "A convenient lie." "Like the non-existent Dr. Richardson she claimed to consult," James added, "my actual medical records show a temporary condition that resolved 2 years ago. Records I never signed, by the way. Those signatures were forged." Matthew finally spoke, his voice dripping with familiar contempt. "You can't prove any of this. It's your word against ours, brother. And who's going to believe?" "I believe him." Claire's voice rang clear as she entered through the side door, case files in hand. A collective gasp went through the room at her still visible bruises. "I have proof of everything. The abuse, the previous affairs, the stolen funds from his last apartment in Colorado." Matthew's face contorted with rage. "You stupid." "Choose your next words very carefully," Chief Harrison warned, standing. Matthew's next words fell like hammer blows. "The department's internal affairs unit is particularly interested in those falsified inspection reports, especially the ones covering buildings linked to known illegal substance dealers." The room had gone deathly quiet. Andrea's former supporters were physically edging away from her. Matthew's fellow firefighters stared at him with naked disgust. James opened his briefcase methodically. "I'm providing the board with complete documentation. Bank records, surveillance logs, witness statements, evidence of systematic theft from multiple charitable organizations." He turned to face the accused. "You used my reputation as a shield. Used this school as cover. Used children for profit and personal gain." His smile was terrifying in its calmness. "Now you can explain it all to the federal agents and to the DEA task force waiting outside." "This is ridiculous." Andrea tried one last time. "I'm pregnant." "You can't?" About that, one of the FBI agents stepped forward. "We have some interesting lab results to discuss." The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Andrea Mitchell faced sentencing. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by prison orange. Her carefully styled hair was now limp and dull. Her attorney, a public defender, since her assets were frozen, shuffled papers nervously. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez arranged her exhibits with practiced precision. "The state calls Dr. Michael Chun, chief of obstetrics at Metro General," the prosecutor announced. The distinguished physician took the stand, consulting his records. "Mrs. Mitchell's pregnancy test results are conclusive. Conception occurred approximately 8 weeks ago, not during the claimed 5-year affair." Andrea's lawyer rose halfway. "Objection. Relevance. Goes to pattern of deception, Your Honor," Martins replied smoothly. "The defendant used this pregnancy to manipulate sympathy, just as she used falsified medical claims to solicit fraudulent donations." Overruled, Judge Harry Knowles said, her patience clearly thinning. She had read the case files and seen the evidence. Lives endangered for profit. From the gallery, James watched as Martinez methodically built her case. Surveillance footage caught Andrea conducting substance transactions during school functions. Student witnesses confirmed that study sessions were a cover for dealer meetings. Bank records showed systematic theft from multiple charities. The defendant didn't just steal money, Martinez addressed the jury. She stole trust. Trust from parents who believed their donations helped children. Trust from students who witnessed illegal substance deals disguised as tutoring. Trust from colleagues who raised thousands for fictional medical treatments. Andrea cracked under cross-examination. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "James was never there. Always playing hero while I suffered." "Define suffering, Mrs. Mitchell," Martinez interrupted. "Was it suffering to steal from children's fundraisers? Suffering to deal illegal substances on school grounds? Or was it suffering to lie about your husband's fertility to cover your affair?" "Matthew promised we'd be together," Andrea sobbed. "Once we had enough money." The courtroom doors opened. Federal marshals led in Matthew Reynolds, no longer in his proud uniform, but prison coveralls. His eyes met Andrea's with cold calculation. The defendant, Matthew Reynolds, his lawyer announced, wishes to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for sentencing consideration. Andrea's wail of betrayal echoed through the courthouse. "You promised. After everything we did." "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Knowles warned, "control yourself or you'll be removed." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Andrea sobbed. "The baby isn't mine," Matthew stated flatly. "DNA test confirms it. Not mine. Not James's." His smile was cruel. "Seems you were busy with more than just our operation, weren't you?" The final betrayal silenced even Andrea's sobs. Her web of lies collapsed completely, leaving nothing but cold justice. 1 year later, James stood in his converted basement, now a state-of-the-art training facility for the fire department. The grow operations infrastructure had been completely stripped out, the space reclaimed for legitimate use. Insurance had covered the renovation costs, turning a symbol of betrayal into one of redemption and brotherhood. Looking sharp, Cap, Tom commented, adjusting the settings on a new piece of exercise equipment. Young firefighters worked out nearby, the space alive with purpose. "Hard to believe what this place used to be," Tom added, shaking his head. The department had emerged stronger from the scandal. Matthew's betrayal had led to stricter oversight and a renewed commitment to their oath. The Brotherhood learned that true loyalty meant accountability, not blind trust. Across town, Claire loaded the last boxes into her moving truck. Her nursing license had transferred easily to Seattle's Swedish Medical Center. The divorce settlement had given her everything. The judge cited Matthew's documented abuse and theft as justification. "You didn't have to help with the move," she told James as he carried another box. "Yes, I did," he said simply, his response firm. "You helped bring them down. Showed real courage." "Sometimes courage is just being too tired to be afraid anymore." She managed a small smile. "Heard about Andrea's appeal." "Denied. Full sentence, stands minus 15 years for illegal substance distribution near a school." James secured the box in the truck. Matthew's facing 20+ for the falsified inspections and endangering firefighters and civilians. Doesn't play well with the parole board. The baby's paternity had become public record, a final twist that stripped away any remaining sympathy. Neither a child nor a symbol of their affair, just another lie in their tapestry of deception. James' office at the station held one reminder of the ordeal, a framed firefighter's oath. Loyalty, it began, not just to the job but to the truth itself. The word held deeper meaning now, defined by the courage to face hard truths rather than comfortable lies. The betrayal had cost him a marriage and tested his faith and friendship, but it hadn't broken him. Instead, it revealed strength he hadn't known he possessed, the ability to stand alone for the truth, regardless of personal cost. "Captain," a young firefighter appeared in his doorway. "Got a call. Warehouse fire downtown." James grabbed his gear with practiced efficiency. Life continued. Emergencies still needed handling. People still needed saving. The past was sealed in court records and prison sentences, but the future belonged to those strong enough to face the truth without flinching. He paused at his office door, glancing at one last photo from the evidence files. Andrea and Matthew being led away in handcuffs, their web of lies finally exposed to daylight. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge isn't elaborately planned. Sometimes it's as simple as letting the truth have its day in court and watching as deception crumbles under its own weight. The station alarm blared. James headed for his truck, leaving the past behind. He had lives to save, a duty to fulfill, and a brotherhood that now understood the true meaning of loyalty. In the end, justice hadn't just been served. It had been earned, one piece of evidence at a time. Epilogue. 10 years later, the high-security women's correctional facility in Dublin, California, looked especially stark under the morning sun. Andrea Mitchell, now inmate 4729, shuffled through her daily routine in the prison laundry. Her once perfectly manicured hands were rough from industrial detergents. Her carefully maintained appearance had long since surrendered to institutional anonymity. Mitchell. Visitor, the guard's voice echoed through the facility. Andrea's heart leaped, then immediately sank. After 10 years, she still hoped, but it was never who she wanted it to be. Her parents had disowned her after the scandal. Her former colleagues never responded to her letters. Matthew hadn't contacted her since his testimony destroyed what remained of her life. The visitor's room held a familiar face. Susan Parker, her former teaching colleague. The years hadn't been kind to their relationship. "The board wanted me to inform you personally," Susan began without preamble. "Your teaching license has been permanently revoked." The appeal was denied. Andrea's shoulders slumped. She had clung to hope of returning to teaching after her release in 5 years. "Susan, please. We were friends." "Friends?" Susan's laugh was bitter. "I helped raise money for your fake fertility treatments. My students, children I was responsible for, were exposed to your substance operation. Do you know Tony Martinez? He overdosed last year. His first exposure to illegal substances was during one of your tutoring sessions." Andrea's carefully maintained prison composure cracked. "I never sold directly to students. That wasn't part of." "Save it." Susan stood, her voice cold. "The board's decision is final." "And Andrea? Those recommendation letters you asked for, none of us will write them. None of us will help you teach anywhere ever again." After Susan left, Andrea sat alone, reality crushing down. 20 years into her sentence, increased after multiple failed appeals, with no possibility of returning to her career. Her pregnancy had ended in miscarriage during her first year in prison. Stress and guilt, the doctor said. The father, it turned out, had been a dealer from their distribution network, adding one final humiliation to her disgrace. Across the country, in a maximum security federal prison in Colorado, Matthew Reynolds faced his own daily hell. His cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a slightly reduced sentence, but his crimes against fellow firefighters had made him a marked man among inmates. Former first responders in prison were rare and rarely forgiven by the general population. Reynolds, a guard, barked, banging his baton against the bars. "Your lawyer's here." The attorney looked uncomfortable in the prison meeting room. "It's about your latest appeal." The fire chief testified again. Between the falsified inspection reports and the equipment maintenance fraud, they're maintaining the enhanced sentencing. You're not getting out early. Matthew's prison-aged face showed no surprise. His testimony against Andrea had earned him 5 years off his sentence, but he still faced another decade inside. His attempt to claim mental duress from Claire's supposed emotional abuse had backfired spectacularly when she produced years of documented evidence to the contrary. "What about my pension?" he asked, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. "Forfeit. The department's decision was upheld, given the lives endangered by your actions." The lawyer shuffled his papers. "The civil suits are also proceeding. Once you're released, any income you earn will be garnished for restitution." Matthew returned to his cell, where a newspaper clipping mocked him from the wall. It showed James Mitchell receiving a commendation for reforming the department's inspection protocols. The Mitchell regulations were now standard across multiple states, ensuring no other corrupt inspector could endanger lives for profit. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Claire Reynolds, now Claire Bennett, reviewed patient charts in Swedish Medical Center's trauma unit. Her nursing career had flourished after leaving Matthew's shadow. She had earned her nurse practitioner license, specializing in domestic violence cases. Dr. Bennett, a colleague, called, "Your 3 o'clock domestic violence support group is ready." She turned her experience into purpose, helping other women escape abusive relationships. Her testimony at Matthew's trial had inspired a department-wide review of domestic violence responses among first responders, leading to stronger support systems and accountability measures. The ring of her phone interrupted her thoughts. The display showed James Mitchell's name. "Claire," James said, "remember that training program you proposed? The one teaching emergency personnel to recognize domestic violence among their colleagues?" "Of course," she replied. "The National Board approved it. They want you to head the implementation." She smiled, remembering how far she'd come from the frightened woman in that emergency room. "I'll need a good fire captain to help with the first responder aspects." "Already volunteered," James replied. "Tom's handling the station while I help with training." Back in California, James Mitchell's fire station had become a model for departmental integrity. The training facility in his converted basement hosted regular sessions on ethics and accountability. The framed oath on his wall had gained companions, commendations for his role in reforming department policies, awards for the peer support program he'd established. "Captain," Tom's voice carried excitement as he entered James' office. "They've approved the expansion. 3 more departments adopting the Mitchell regulations next month." James nodded, reviewing the proposal. His experience had sparked a national conversation about oversight in emergency services. The protocols he developed after Matthew's betrayal were becoming standard practice across the country. His phone buzzed with a message from Detective Sarah Martinez, now heading the department's expanded Internal Affairs Division. "Final report on the Roosevelt High reconstruction. All traces of their operation gone. New administration's doing great work." The school had recovered from Andrea's betrayal, though the scars remained. Her former students, now adults, still dealt with the impact of her actions, the betrayed trust, the shattered innocence. Consequences that extended far beyond her prison sentence. James' new wife, Dr. Rachel Chin, Sarah's sister from forensic accounting, understood his dedication to reform. They had met during the investigation, bonding over shared values of integrity and justice. Their twin daughters, now 5, were growing up understanding that true strength came from standing for truth. The Mitchell Integrity Foundation called, Rachel mentioned over dinner. "They want you to keynote their law enforcement conference. The theme is trust and accountability in public service." James considered the invitation. The foundation, funded partly by recovered illegal substance money from Andrea and Matthew's operation, supported programs preventing corruption in public service. Their work had helped implement many of the reforms sparked by the case. Late that night, James stood in his basement gym, now a testament to redemption. Young firefighters trained here, learning not just physical skills but ethical principles. The truth about Andrea and Matthew's operation had nearly destroyed the department's reputation, but the reforms that followed made it stronger. A news alert caught his attention. Andrea's latest appeal denied. Matthew's restitution payments increased. Their betrayal had failed to break him. Instead, it had catalyzed changes that would prevent others from following their path. Claire's domestic violence programs were saving lives. The Mitchell regulations were protecting communities. Even the pain Andrea and Matthew caused had been transformed into positive change. Sometimes, James reflected, justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about turning betrayal into betterment, using hard truths to forge stronger systems. The station alarm sounded, another emergency, another chance to serve. As James headed for his truck, he passed the wall of photos in the station house. Images of his crew, his family, his reform department. And in the center, the firefighter's oath that had started it all. Loyalty, it still began. But now everyone understood. Loyalty not to individuals, but to truth and justice themselves. Behind bars, Andrea and Matthew lived with their choices, watching from prison as their victims transformed tragedy into triumph. Their betrayal hadn't destroyed James Mitchell. Instead, it had revealed his true strength, not just surviving their deception, but using it to protect others. In the end, their greatest punishment wasn't the prison sentences or lost careers. It was watching powerless as their victims built something better from the ashes of their lies. That, James knew, was justice's final victory.